Welcome to my March 2022 webinar. Um, I should explain a little bit about what motivated me to choose this topic, what to do when it just hurts too much. I've been working with a number of people lately, actually been fairly busy, I have to say, and that's a good thing. And I'm always willing to help people. Actually got a chance to work with some people who had COVID and was able to help them some. And in working with these, excuse me, these particular people, I was struck by how the work I would do would produce an effect that I could feel in the energy field, and then it would seem to slip back. They would revert to the state they were in before. And I had tried to do some work with, what influences had produced their particular condition. And that seemed to work. And then still there was this residual. And so I wanted to look a little deeper into what was going on with them. And I did. And what I discovered was that there was a level of energy disturbance, kind of energy disturbance, that they were not really aware of. Now, this webinar isn't only for those who are not aware of some pain or trauma, something that has happened in the past and possibly in past lifetimes. So it's for anybody who is dealing with pain. But there are times when that pain just hurts too much and we feel inclined to just run away from it, to put it aside. And this may not be a conscious thing. It may be what we call in psychology repression, or at least suppression of the feeling that was there. And the feeling that I was found in this couple of people was a feeling of profound hurt that was really very deep. And there was past lifetime factors that were involved in that, and then also in this lifetime. And because the pain, the hurt, was so intense, they couldn't deal with it. They didn't want to deal with it. It was so unpleasant. And this is very common when there's trauma. And we're so inclined not to deal with the pain. And we can dance around it in so many ways. We can't just not feel it. And the reason for that is that there's so much energy bound up in the trauma pain that's inside the field. And so that pain is going to find expression somewhere. It may show up in our behavior in terms of just how we relate to others or particular kinds of people. It may show up when we're called upon to do something where we have to engage in a certain way that could potentially expose us to the same kind of hurt. And so we'll avoid certain activities or certain kinds of activities so that we don't feel that pain, so that we don't get triggered, is what it's called. And the mechanisms by which we can avoid being triggered, and the excuse me, I'm going to just pause for a moment. And the lengths that we will go to keep from feeling the pain again can be very extreme. A lot of times we cover up that pain with anger. Sometimes if it's sadness, or it's a depressed feeling that we have, grief feeling that we're holding, we may cover that up with bubbly joy, the opposite kind of feeling. But sometimes we find ourselves lashing out at people, or just even kind of to ourselves, just being critical and negative about things, and we don't even realize we're doing it. Or we may become aware that we're being critical, but we're not aware of the underlying motivation, the thing that's driving that criticism that makes it such an intense experience. And the key thing about that is that when we vent, even if we talk about something, that has, say, made us grieving, or that has made us hurt, that's been painful to us, that usually doesn't help very much. But that is our most common way of coping, is to talk to somebody. And we may be talking around the subject. That is, we may not be saying what it was that hurt us and why that hurt us and how that feels. We may just be saying, oh, I don't feel very good. I'm upset, or I'm angry. Or I'd like to go punch that person. But that doesn't usually relieve the pressure very much. It may relieve us enough that we can function, that we can sort of get along, but the hurting or the grieving particularly are still bubbling inside of us. And so what we need is a way to deal with intense emotions like that, intense pain or intense grief, a sense of loss, typically, and to use our skill in dealing with that when it comes up, so that we can function, so that we can be happy again, and really enjoy life. And I mentioned before that my father-in-law had just passed, and I'm finding in myself that there's a level of grief that's there, which is triggered by his passing, but is not caused by his passing. That it's actually old grief that still remains not completely resolved. I've worked on it quite a bit, actually. There's still some elements there, and so I need to revisit that. So what do we do? How do we respond when we find ourselves, some people call it a PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not really a disorder, but just a post-traumatic stress reaction. When we're acting out, when we're suffering, or causing others to suffer on our behalf, how do we deal with that? The first step is the most important, and it's an amazing thing. And I've watched it go on in myself, and I've certainly seen it in lots and lots of the clients I work with. And the step is simply to pause, to just stop. Now, if we're out doing something somewhere, that may not be the opportunity, but it can happen. Supposing somebody does something trivial, you're at a grocery store and they cut you off in the checkout line or something, and you feel this explosive rage inside of you, and you just want to go over there and knock their cart over. And you may not be able to do much there, but you might want to go, whoa, that is a strong reaction. It's time for me to pause. And so you may want to just be standing there in the line and just kind of be quiet inside, but making a mental note that you're going to have to sit down, perhaps when you get home, and you're going to have to really pause and just stop and see what's there. Like that, only longer. It's in that pause, and I think you probably felt it when I just stopped talking there for a moment. You felt that, oh, there's this stillness, and then there's this thing that's going on. But I'm watching that. I'm watching that. Now, I've talked a lot about focusing in other webinars. I'm going to go through the procedure again here a little bit. But the thing I want to really try to make a point of is that we practice recognizing when we're triggered. And it could be a trivial event that triggers us. We feel that tension inside of us, anger or frustration or sadness or just the pain itself starts to bubble up a little bit. We could feel it a little bit. And we don't want to feel that, right? And we notice that. And so the key thing, the key thing is to pause. You can write that down if you want to, so you can remember this later. The thing that happens, though, is when I wrote the title of this webinar, What to Do When It Just Hurts Too Much, it's hard to remember to pause. There's that feeling, and it's, oh my God, I got this terrible feeling and I want to avoid it. I got to get away from it. I got to do something. I'll go distract myself. I'll turn on and scroll through YouTube videos or whatever. And I catch myself doing that. So it's okay if you do it. Instead of saying, hey, I need to actually attend to something that is kind of out of sight, even something I'm not really paying attention to, that needs attention. It's crying out for attention. It's crying out for attention, and we're not attending to it. We're putting it off. And being put off doesn't feel very good. And so that part that is hurting, or that part that is sad and grieving, pushes back. And so to deal with that, to actually deal with that, is elegantly simple, but you got to pause. You have to stop and give it attention. And so that's the key thing. We pause, and then it's what is there. And we have to greet it with a welcoming attitude. If we greet it with the fear that is going to overwhelm us and we're going to melt into, a river of tears, if that's the feeling that we have, then we have to say, and I recognize, you say this to yourself or to the part even, and I recognize that you're afraid that you're just going to be overwhelmed. Isn't that a beautiful thing? You can even say hello. Oh, I see this thing. Hello to the part of me that is hurting or afraid. And I realize that that part is afraid of being overwhelmed by its own feeling. And you can say, there's a phrase that we often use, and I am here with that. You just kind of repeat it. I am here with that part of me that is afraid of being overwhelmed by its feelings. And then again, we pause. We pause to give it time to see what it wants to tell us, what it needs from us, which is often just attention. There are instances that I find where the part refuses to talk. So you invite it and it just doesn't let on. And you get no real sense of what it is. You know there's something there, but it's not telling you what it is. That it's all this pain, this heartache that it's been carrying possibly for lifetimes, as was the case just recently I was working with. Lifetimes of pain. And that's hard to bear. And it's vague. It's often very vague. And so you can't be demanding with that part that is hurting. You just want to be with it, with compassion. And so you can say something, compassionate or empathetic. I see that you're hurting, really, really hurting. And this is very difficult for you. And you wait. It's okay to wait. If the mind starts to wander, your mind starts to wander, just, oh, there's that part. And sooner or later, it starts to open up a little bit. It lets you know something. Oh, I'm just carrying this great pain, this huge burden, and I'm tired. And, it may go on and on about what's going on with it, how it feels about it. But it may not come right away. You have to be patient with it. It can take a while. It can take a while. And it may tell you a story of why it's hurting, or at least how it's hurting. But hearing its story is just hearing its story. It's not solving the problem in the story, which sometimes people try to do. But it's not that. You just hear it, whatever it says. And you might offer something compassionate again. Well, of course you feel hurt. That was a, painful thing that happened, whatever that was. It's usually a great loss or a great frustration, that you may have been the victim of something or hurt by somebody, or, something that was not something you couldn't handle. And you may have to be compassionate with the part that just couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle it. And so they still carry that. I remember working with a client who had a marital problem, and the marriage broke up, and the person was very, very hurt. And I tried to very gently get them to deal with the hurt, because that hurt and the resentment that went with that, that combination of feelings was eating them up, literally killing them. Disease is a common manifestation of unaddressed, unrecognized suffering. And it's like the body is screaming, I'm going to make you suffer until you acknowledge that you're suffering. And sadly, in this case, I could not find a way to get them to really just sit with their pain, their terrible pain. And the disease took its course, which is frustrating for me, I have to admit, because I wish that didn't happen, but sometimes it does. And this is where you may need some help, because sometimes you'll get in there and you'll go like, oh, there is a really big hurt in here. I can feel my heart aches whenever I even turn inward. It makes me not want to turn inward. When I pause and I just say hello to it, it's like cuts me off. It won't tell me anything. And that's where, you may need my help in getting to that pain, not to relive it. And I have to make this very clear. I hope it was already clear, but I'll make it very explicit. It's not to relive the pain, only to acknowledge that it's there. And definitely not to relive the story. Although sometimes as you get in there will be a tendency to tell the story. But that's not how you fix it, so to speak. What makes it better is simply being with it, acknowledging it at that very subtle level of awareness, that when we settle deeply into ourselves and we're aware of what's going on inside of us, at that subtle level, we have an opportunity to allow it to transform. Now, sometimes in that process, a little bit of coaxing can be helpful. We have to be very careful not to be critical or not to tell it how it's supposed to be. So there's a little bit of technique, shall we say, involved in dealing with it in this way. And so, we don't want to say, well, you really shouldn't feel that way. You're only hurting yourself. It's, of course you feel that way. You do feel that way. And that really hurts. And then allow that process to resolve itself. This is very different than practicing psychology, where typically you do want to tell the story. Oh, such and such happened and it was a horrible thing. And, you know, one only needs to spend a little bit of time with the news to go like, all over the world, terrible things are happening. You know, right now our news is focused mostly on Ukraine, but there are many other places in the world where people are really suffering in poverty, in under autocratic regimes that, you know, are not helping the people, and the people are suffering greatly. Places where there is conflict, armed conflict, war. And so it's very easy to recognize that out there in the world, there is a great deal of suffering, and we can be upset about even that, just from our, you know, being here. But basically what's happening when we do that is we're triggering ourselves, or allowing ourselves to be triggered by putting attention on things that remind us of a suffering that we have endured. As I say, maybe not even in this lifetime, maybe in a past lifetime. And so we have this tender spot, we might call it. Say, yeah, I have tender feelings about, you know, what's going on in Ukraine or whatever. I certainly do. It's just because I have some connection to that. It's not a, you'd say it's not much of a connection. Why does it bother you? But it just does. And so turning to that and feeling that and allowing that to be there, and, you know, treating it with compassion, like you would a small child that was hurt, is a nice way of saying that. You know, it's, oh, you're hurting. You know, that doesn't feel good. And then just allow that to purify itself, just to bring the, and what it does is it releases, this is what I get to experience, is the release of that energy that's all bound up in the pain. And it starts to flow again. It starts to open up and flow again. Energy flows through the system, and we gain a new vitality and enthusiasm for life, a new openness to living, where there had been something cut off, something blocked by that energy tangle. It's a good term for that, energy tangle. It's the energy is all bound up. So that's, I think, what I wanted to say about the technique, about the approach. It's styled after interrelationship focusing, turning safely with compassion and patience to our wounds and our sadness, the things that hurt inside. And that takes practice. It does take some practice so that we can do that effectively without getting caught up in the story or without bringing our judgment, because it hurts when we feel the hurt. And we don't need to go relive the experience, but just acknowledge that the hurt is there. That's the key thing there. And so we acknowledge that, we welcome that. That's not the right way to say that. We recognize that it is there and acknowledge it and accept it. We greet it with acceptance and compassion and empathy. And then it has a chance to just transform itself. And that transformation is kind of magical. You know, when you start a session like that and, you know, you are sitting with it, with the feeling of hurt, pain, and then you get to the end of that session, however long that may be, and you feel it transform, and you feel that release, that relaxation that comes, that openness that comes. It's kind of miraculous. It really is. And you realize I didn't have to change it, but I also don't have to suppress it any longer. I can acknowledge that it's there. And it's not really that the hurt goes away, it's that it doesn't hold the energy any longer. So you can still look back and say, oh, that hurt. That hurt me. And I carried that hurt a long time. maybe a long, long time. And then it doesn't hurt anymore. Just maybe a little tender, just a little bit left. Or we may even get to the point where there's really no energy there at all. And we just know that, yeah, we had that hurt, but we don't really feel hurt any longer. That's a nice place to be. But you can't make yourself go there. You have to allow that to happen by putting coherent attention on the pain. So at this point, I think I'll entertain any questions. You can put them in the chat window, and I will try to respond to them. And then we will move on to the group clearing session, where we're going to go into whatever my talk may have triggered, or anything else that may be triggered in your life, at least a little bit. Maybe it's just barely peeking out. And then we'll work through that as a group. That is, we'll do it all, each of us individually, but all together, silently. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so I'm going to end the recording here, and we'll go to the group clearing session.